Hey friends, this is Pastor Joe from Southwest Lutheran Church, and we're starting a new little devotional series today I'm really excited about. You may know that in our in-person adult education Bible studies, we have been doing this topic, biblical diversity and race and racism. And so we're thinking about different kinds of people and where do different kinds of people come from in the biblical story, and then how do we address contemporary issues around race and racism. And I've been just really excited to talk about this stuff because number one, it's on all of our minds and the Bible has a lot of good stuff to say about this. And number two, just because this is something that I have been so blessed by, is living and getting to be the pastor of a multi-ethnic congregation. And really kind of, it's hard work to live with different kinds of people, but it has been such a blessing. And I really do believe that God has made us, both as people and as Christians specifically, to live in diverse communities. And so I've just had a great time talking through this with the folks in our sessions. If you haven't been able to join us, well, you get kind of the 3 or 4 minute recaps. And so here we go. In our first session, we started at the beginning. And this has to be foundational to any understanding of humanity from a biblical perspective, is how are we made? And so we started in Genesis chapter 2, where we get kind of the zoomed in focus on the creation of Adam and Eve. And in that story, we see these first two humans. God creates Adam and then looks around the garden and says, look, none of these other creatures I've made, none of the animals, they aren't fit pairs or matches for Adam. And so God creates Eve from Adam, and together they are the first human pair. And in the biblical story, this is where we begin, and every person comes from Adam and Eve. And this is just such a huge, important thing for biblical anthropology. That's the study of humanity. Biblical anthropology, it has to start with this idea that we all are humans. There's just one group of humans in the world. It's not like there's one group of humans who got their start in the Garden of Eden, and they're the good ones, and like another group of humans that came along later from another source, and they're, not as really human as those good humans that God made in the garden. No, in the biblical story, there is just one humanity in the world. We have one origin, and that means really we're all one family, one group of people. We're made equally in the image of God. We asked the question in our study then, well, what about this idea that we call race? Because we hear a lot about it. Here's the truth. Biblically speaking, there is no such concept as race, right? We can see different groups of people. We see different ethnic groups. We see different families. We see different nations. We see different clans or tribes. But there isn't the idea of race that we have in America today, where today, we'll look and we'll say, oh, this is a white person. This is an Asian person. That's a black person. As if that has something to say about the kind of person they are, other than just, the color of their skin. Biblically speaking, race is not a category. There is one humanity in the world. Now, this brings up another question, and this is where we start to get to some applications, right? If race is not a biblical category, should Christians talk about race? Because after all, I don't know about you, but I've heard Christian teachers, speakers, say things like, we don't find race in the Bible, therefore we should never talk about something like racism, because race isn't a biblical category. And at least that part is true. Like I've said, race is not a biblical category, but here's the thing. We very much live in a world that we can say has been racialized. At some point in history, we started to have these ideas that there are different groups of people that depends upon, genetics, inheritance, whatever you've got. And that there's different races of people in the world. We live in a world where this is a reality. This is how people think. And so really, I think as Christians, we ought to address issues of race. We ought to think about things like racism. And we shouldn't be afraid to use those terms as long as we do it understanding that, biblically speaking, there is just one humanity. Because after all, in today's world, socially speaking, there are very much differences between people, say, in America who are white and people who are black, people who come from different immigrant communities. We tend to land in different situations in life. We tend to have different opportunities available to us. We tend to have very different outcomes in our lives. This is all true, and it's good for Christians to think about these and respond to them biblically. But again, it has to start from the foundation that we are one people, one humanity. And indeed, as the church, as Christians, we ought to be thinking about how Jesus restores this oneness of humanity, right? How can we really be one in Christ, one family of God? How can we live that in our lives? So, that's session 1. That is the foundation of talking about biblical diversity and then race and racism. We are one humanity. I can't wait to talk about next session with you. We're going to talk about then, where does diversity come from? And we're going to look at the Tower of Babel story, Genesis 11, and the biblical story, origin of human diversity. See you next time.